Please be seated. Welcome. I'm Walter Sterling, the Dean of St. John's College, Santa Fe. It's my pleasure to welcome this very robust crowd this evening. It's great to see so many of you turn out for this. I want to give a special word of welcome. We have a lot of things going on this weekend to admitted students who are here for Admitted Students Weekend and family members. Some of you are in the audience. Welcome. Some gentle applause. And we also have going on this weekend in conjunction with the Steiner Lecture, the second Hutchins Undergraduate Conference organized by the Student Committee on Instruction here at St. John's College, Santa Fe, and by folks at the University of Chicago. And we have undergraduates from the University of Chicago joining us for that conference, and we're very happy to have you here, so welcome. I want to mention that next week, by a coincidence, Mr. Siddiqui, Tutor Ahmed Siddiqui, who's joining me in introducing our speaker tonight, is going to be the Friday lecture next week. His lecture is titled, "To Be Forever and Immortal, Struggle and Salvation in the Thought of Al-Farabi," and that will be next Friday at 7 o'clock in this same place. It's probably the last thing you need to clap for a little while here. Although this next thing is also very exciting. Next Wednesday, I encourage members of our community to attend to the fact that we have the Bassin Scholars Panel presenting on Wednesday afternoon in the Senior Common Room on Chaucer, coming out of their seminars and discussion and writing experience earlier this semester. Mr. Siddiqui will be introducing our speaker properly. I'm just going to make a few opening remarks. The format this evening, as usual, will be in here for Professor Viroli's talk, and then we'll take about a 10-minute break. You can get more refreshments if they last. And then we will adjourn to the Junior Common Room for the question period. We hope many of you will join us. Professor Viroli spoke to a graduate and former member of our faculty and asked, well, what's this going to be like? And he was told something like, well, you're going to go into one room and you're going to talk for about an hour. Then there'll be a break and you go into a smaller room and students are going to gang up around you and grill you, and it could go on for hours. And we told him it's not exactly like that, but we hope that you students will at least give some shadow of truth to that account that he was given. I want to make a comment on the Steiner Memorial Lecture. The Steiner Lecture was endowed and is named in honor of Andrew Steiner, a graduate of the college and the late husband of one of our former Board of Visitors and Governors members. The Steiner Lecture has been in place on our campuses for just over 20 years. Its intent is to bring to campus people of distinction who might bring a new perspective to the work we do, and Professor Viroli fits that quite precisely and exquisitely. And it's always a pleasure to introduce a Steiner lecturer. As Andrew Steiner, the graduate that we honor, was a warm human being, a successful graduate of the college, and one who considered his years as an undergraduate the golden years of his life that informed everything he did after. I just want to mention that Professor Viroli is visiting us for the first time, but he has had some intersections with St. John's. I don't know if I'm trying not to steal any of your thunder, Mr. Siddiqui, but the serendipity of having him here today was partly from the fact that he was lecturing at the Rome Study Abroad program last summer, the Rome Institute of Liberal Arts that Johnnies attend every year. And just at the moment that we were planning for this year, I became aware of that, and that one thing led to another, to his invitation and agreeing to come this year. And I believe he's going to be speaking at that program again this summer. And there have been other intersections between his teaching at the University of Texas and our graduates and faculty. So though his first time here, we've considered him a potential friend and now an actual friend, and I personally want to welcome him and Gabriella to our campus and to Santa Fe for the first time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Siddiqui to introduce Professor Viroli properly.
I have the pleasure this evening of welcoming one of the world's leading authorities on Machiavelli to speak to us about that very topic. Now, Professor Viroli is a tremendously accomplished scholar, and the short summary that I'm going to give right now will not do justice to his career, but I think it is worth highlighting just a few things. Professor Viroli received his PhD from the European University Institute, where he defended his thesis on Jean-Jacques Rousseau in front of a distinguished jury, including the renowned Quentin Skinner. He taught at Princeton University for 27 years as a professor of politics. Since 2008, he has been professor of political communication at the University of Italian Switzerland in Lugano. And since 2013 or 2014, I don't quite remember, he's been a professor in the Department of Government at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Viroli is the author of somewhere between 13 and 25 books, as far as I could find out. Nobody knows for sure, I believe. His latest book, Prophetic Times, Visions of Emancipation in the History of Italy, appeared in print for the first time this year. And in addition to these books, he has authored a great number of scholarly articles on a range of topics related to politics. And beyond being a scholar of the first rate, Professor Viroli is also an active citizen, having directed many civic educational projects in Italy and having served as an advisor for various political initiatives. Now that's everything that it says on this piece of paper, but I would like to add a couple of things that are oddly missing from most of his official biographies. Professor Viroli has always been a devoted fan of the Italian football club Cesena. Now when I heard that team had briefly dissolved in 2018, I thought, frankly, that he would immediately fall sick and die. And we are very lucky that he did not, and as my understanding goes, the team has since reformed, so it would have been excessive anyway. When I was a student, Professor Viroli and his wife, Gabriella, were kind enough to have me over for a wonderful dinner at their home, and I was able to see for myself that he kept a portrait of Silvio Berlusconi over the desk where he wrote. Now, before anybody gets the wrong ideas, this is not because Professor Viroli admires Silvio Berlusconi. He does not. It is because he finds the image of his enemy motivating while he writes. And he has written somewhere between 13 to 25 books. So as our sophomores are finishing up their enabling essays this weekend, I want to encourage all of you to follow the example of our esteemed guest. Find a picture of your worst enemy and stare at it until the ideas come flowing out of you. I'll just finish with this. We learned from Machiavelli that there are three types of mind: those that understand by themselves, those that discern what others understand, and those that can do neither. And after hearing Professor Viroli speak, I think you will all agree with me that he possesses the first kind. Please join me in welcoming Maurizio Viroli.
The portrait of Berlusconi appears in a book called The Liberty of the Servants, in which I was claiming that Italians, under Berlusconi, we were free. Indeed, we were free, but we had the liberty of the servants. So it was not exactly a work in praise of Berlusconi. It was a work in which I was seriously criticizing Berlusconi. So I'm at least innocent of this sin. I have never been, not for a second, a supporter of Berlusconi. This for my political credentials. And it's Lent time, therefore it's a time of penitence and penance. So in order to properly absolve these duties of this period of the year, I have decided to come here and give a lecture on this subject. Niccolo Machiavelli, a good teacher of goodness. Why does that qualify as penance and penitence? Because I'm sure that this lecture will irreparably damage my reputation as a scholar, if I have one left. This is absolutely guaranteed, and I thank you very much, our dean and my former student Ahmed for their very kind works. But if there is one thing that is sure, that in the United States, at least in the United States, if you want to lose your reputation as a scholar, all you have to do is to claim that Machiavelli was a teacher of goodness. In the best case scenario, people listening to you will say that you are whitewashing, that's a nice expression, whitewashing, or sanitizing Machiavelli. In the worst case scenario, they will say that you are a poor scholar who prefers illusions to reality. Yet, what I intend to claim here is not only that Machiavelli was a teacher of goodness, but that also he was a good man, who taught goodness. You know the origins of the idea of Machiavelli as a teacher of evil. Professor Leo Strauss famously declared that, in fact, he was a teacher of evil and an evil man. But then the persuasion that Machiavelli was an evil man has become nowadays almost prevailing, at least in the Anglo-Saxon world. A scholar, a famous, important scholar, Professor Robert Black, whom I admire deeply, has written in his last book that Machiavelli was cynical, irreligious, devious, ambitious, deceitful, and misogynist. This is the new trend. And Black insists also that Machiavelli was a deeply cynical individual, a pragmatist who was just offering guidance on the varying circumstances for winning glory in a rotten world lacking moral or divine order. Allow me to clarify my position by first explaining why he was a good man, and then why he was indeed a teacher of goodness. Before I proceed, accept my apologies, first because I have an allergy, and second because of my accent. I know it's an Italian accent. There is nothing I can do about it. No. To be exact, there is something I can do. If I wanted, if I concentrate, I could probably speak with an excellent English accent. But if, indeed, I speak with an English accent, then I concentrate on the accent, and I forget what I have to say. So it's better that be kind enough to survive my Italian accent. Well, against the idea that Machiavelli was an evil man, stand a few testimonies of eminent Florentines who knew him very well. The most notable is in a letter from April 16, 1514, from Francesco Vettori, a member of the Florentine political elite. After a long discussion on international political and military matters, Machiavelli at the time was no longer in the government of Florence, was no longer had positions of responsibility in the government department. But he was still discussing with Vettori matters of high importance. And Vettori makes, in a letter to another eminent Florentine, Lorenzo Strozzi, you know who the Strozzi were, officer of the Monte, Vettori writes, Machiavelli è povero e buono, is poor and good. And I can testify that he has worked a lot for the Republic. You know that Machiavelli was a secretary to the second chancery of the Republic of Florence from 1498 until 1512. E non ha mai messo un soldo in avanzo. He has never made any money while he was in government. Another highly positive judgment on Machiavelli's moral character, I'm focusing on this now, on the character, because, you know, normally scholars, my field, history of political ideas, we focus on the ideas, on the texts. Now, at my late age, I think that there is no way of making sense of texts unless you also know the person who wrote those texts. What kind of person wrote the person, what kind of was that person when he or she composed the text. And that's why I'm focusing on the person, on the man, on Machiavelli. Luigi Alamanni, another friend of Machiavelli. Luigi Alamanni was quite a remarkable character. He was a strong Republican. In 1522, along with other younger Florentines, Zanobi Buondelmonti and Jacopo da Diaceto, they tried to liberate Florence from the Medici. They tried a conspiracy. It failed. Alamanni and others were beheaded. So this is a person who lost his life in order to try to restore Florentine liberty. Well, Alamanni wrote that Machiavelli was not just a good man, non era solo buono, era un santo. I think this is going too far. But certainly the coincidence of the two judgments is rather remarkable. And I think it's just fair for once. Just ask Machiavelli what he thought of himself. Now, what he thought of himself is that he considered himself a good man. Here I have only the citations, so that I think will help to follow my presentation. Machiavelli, in the most famous letter of his correspondence, and probably the most famous letter in the Italian history, the letter of December 10, 1513, to Vettori, says, "There should be no doubt about my faith, for since I have always kept it, I should not start learning how to break it now. Whoever has been honest and faithful for 43 years, as I have, is unable to change his nature. My poverty is the witness to my loyalty and goodness. Della bontà mia è testimone la povertà mia." Notice the consistency between Vettori's opinion on Machiavelli and Machiavelli's own opinion of himself. My poverty is the evidence of my goodness. Faithful and good. That's how Machiavelli proudly writes. Faithful to whom? Faithful to what? Well, the answer is simple. Faithful to his patria, faithful to the Republic of Florence. Machiavelli also asserts that it is his own nature to be good and faithful, and he cannot change it. Well, to substantiate his assertion, he invokes his poverty as compelling evidence. What was Machiavelli, in fact, saying in that letter? He meant to remind Vettori that he conducted himself with impeccable honesty when he was serving as a secretary, like I said, of a second chancery. This idea that poverty is the evidence of honesty, of the honesty of public officers, was certainly a commonplace in Florentine political language. But the important point, my friends, is that to my knowledge, maybe tonight I'm losing my reputation, assuming I have still one. To my knowledge, no one in the immense literature on Machiavelli has been able to refute Niccolo's declarations of honesty and goodness. In fact, when the Medici family, you know, the bankers, established their regime in Florence in September 1512, they first dismissed Niccolo from his post. And then, as it always happened in transitional phases, the Medici, the new rulers, appointed a committee. A committee to do what? A committee to examine, how Machiavelli had used the enormous sums of money that he had administered because he was paying the mercenary soldiers. Even that committee found no evidence whatsoever of misappropriation or misuse. There are other evidences that I'd like to share with you about the kind of person Machiavelli was when he was in office. But I want maybe we can do that in the discussion period. I also now focus on other proclamation of goodness. Machiavelli said that he was a good man. He was proud of saying that he was a good man. And this time the text that is important is the preface to Book 2 of the Discourses on Life, this large work on which he worked from 1513 until 1519, I think. Machiavelli here writes, "It is the duty of a good man, è offizio di uomo buono, to teach others the good, il bene, that you could not work because of the malignity of the times and fortune. So that when many are capable of it, someone of them, more loved by heaven, may be able to work it." So he describes his intellectual project, that is to say, writing the discourses, as a project whose goal was the duty of a good man, to teach the good that he himself was not able to put in practice when in his lifetime. Machiavelli considered himself at the time already an old man. Same story with the other work on which Machiavelli worked until 1521, The Art of War. Again, he writes explicitly that the reason why he composed that text was to teach the younger generations how to serve the liberty and the dignity of the Republic of Florence, because he thought that this was his duty as uomo buono. So we have textual evidences that he considered himself not only uomo buono, but he wrote at least 2 of his most important works in order to put in practice his own idea of being good. Let's assume that this is right. But what Machiavelli did in fact say about goodness, about what does it mean, what did it mean for him to be good? Which are his reflections on goodness? Now, surprisingly, scholars have dedicated very little attention, if at all, to Machiavelli's ideas on goodness and related concepts. I know all the scholars, we all say the scholarship is missing, but this time is also true. In fact, just read the biography in the collection of all the works of Machiavelli. It's an enormous biography. I think it's about 2,500 titles. Only one work on the subject of goodness. The scholars have focused on other concepts that are central in Machiavelli's vocabulary, such as virtù, but very little or almost no essays have been published on goodness and the related terms. Well, Machiavelli, if we focus now on how he used the word good and goodness, his vocabulary, we find that for Machiavelli, as for Cicero, and the followers of Cicero, the Italian humanists, what did it mean to be a good person? To be a good person means for Machiavelli to be a good citizen. That is to say, to serve the common good and the common liberty of your republic. To fight, to stand against corruption, to detest fraud, to be ready to defend one's own patria, one's own fatherland, to reward virtue, to be prepared to punish the enemies of liberty with the utmost severity. Machiavelli's leading idea is very simple. He wanted to empower goodness because he believed, and he knew very well, that goodness brings about liberty, while the lack of goodness brings about servitude. Indeed, citizens who have no goodness at all Machiavelli writes in the Discourses, they bring about the ruin of their fatherland. Those who live in a corrupt city, Machiavelli writes, where the education has not produced any goodness, bontà in them, they would be content to see the ruin of their fatherland. That is what brings about the lack of goodness. A fine example of Machiavelli's conception of goodness is his treatment of the conduct of the Roman nobility and the tribunes of the plebs in the case of two prominent Roman, ancient Roman, of course, political leaders, Manlio Capitolino. Manlio, writes Machiavelli, was a citizen of great virtue, of spirit and body, who, blinded by envy, set out to make tumults in Rome against the Senate and the laws of the fatherland. So you have this prominent citizen, Manlio, who had accomplished important military and political achievements for the Republic of Rome. But then he turned seditious, and both the plebeians and the Senate, that is to say the nobility, opposed his plans. And what is Machiavelli's comment? His comment is, since goodness, bontà, pervaded the mores of the Romans, both the nobility and the tribunes opposed his subversive design. So because they were still good, they resisted, I insist, both the nobility and the plebeians, a fact that was quite unique in Roman history. They stopped and resisted the designs of these prominent citizens. There is nothing, Machiavelli writes, I do not believe that there is an example in history more apt to show the goodness, la bontà, of the orders of that republic. Machiavelli's persuasion that to be a good man means to serve the republic's liberty also surfaces in his praise of exemplary citizens, such as Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus. Let me summarize the story. Cincinnatus simply refused the prolongation of his command as consul because he did not want to set a precedent. And how does Machiavelli judge the behavior of this consul who refused to be reappointed because he did not want to create a precedent? Machiavelli writes, from this episode, all those who seek to be held good citizens ought to take example. That's the example of a good citizen for Machiavelli. But there is something even more fascinating for me. It is to say how Machiavelli judged his contemporaries, the Florentines of his own time. The case in point is Niccolo Valori. Niccolo Valori was a follower of Savonarola. You know who Savonarola, who was the prophet who preached in Florence, and de facto was the one who persuaded the Florentines to institute a popular government in 1494. Well, Niccolo Valori was a follower of Savonarola. He was a Florentine aristocrat. And he was a Republican. He was a supporter of Republican liberty. This man demonstrated remarkable intellectual and moral uprightness. Niccolo Valori died on 20 May 1527 during the sack of Rome by Landsknecht, the German pikemen that invaded Italy in 1527 and produced the sack of Rome. His death, Machiavelli wrote, was unworthy della vita e della bontà sua, was unworthy of his life and his goodness, because no citizen was as dedicated to his patria as Valori was. And notice, in Machiavelli's judgment about Niccolo Valori, he writes, his poverty was the best evidence of his goodness. Yet again, the same couple of words, goodness and poverty. He morì povero. He died so poor that his grandchildren refused his will. And to complete the picture of Valori as a good citizen, Machiavelli stresses that Valori never incited sedition, and throughout his life, he always defended the liberty of Florence. So that is the example of a good man for Machiavelli. Goodness, my friends, does not necessarily mean powerlessness. That's the key point for Machiavelli. If you are good, you don't need to be powerless. Machiavelli's works are repleted with examples of powerful goodness. Goodness and prudence, political prudence, produce for Machiavelli obedience and admiration. In the Discourses on Livy, he writes about how the Roman people accepted Romulus' political institutions because they marveled at his bontà e prudenza, goodness and prudence. With his goodness and his prudence, Scipio, the famous general, captain, goodness and prudence permitted Scipio to achieve splendid military victories in Asia. Also, Machiavelli notes that Cincinnatus was good and valiant. This is the combination of principles that Machiavelli urges. Camillo's outstanding goodness had the power of winning over envy. Well, in another text, Machiavelli writes about the episode of the Fabii, a family that engaged in combat against the Low nation. And of them, he says that the citizens esteemed the virtue and goodness of Camillus, that they put aside all envy, the Senate and the other, and again place all weight of that republic on him. So goodness is the political force that pushes, encourages citizens to put aside envy and to look for the common good. What is, with the help of goodness, with the help of virtue, goodness restores and preserves political liberty, even in a corrupt citizen. This is, I think, a central aspect of Machiavelli's political position. Machiavelli writes, and I hope I find the quote here. Ah, yes, by miracle I've done it. But Machiavelli writes about how to preserve liberty in a corrupt city. Corruption means, for Machiavelli, that citizens, they only care about their private or factional interests. That is corruption. That is exactly what Machiavelli means. So how do you preserve liberty in a city like that? Machiavelli writes, one should presuppose as a thing very true that a corrupt city that lives under a prince can never be turned into a free one. So if you're under the prince, you are not free, even if that prince is eliminated along with all his line. On the contrary, one prince must eliminate the other, and without the creation of a new lord, it never settles down. Unless, indeed, the goodness of one individual, together with virtue, keeps it free. That's what it takes to restore liberty and preserve liberty in a corrupt city. I repeat it, la bontà di uno, the goodness of one individual. Grandiose and highly difficult accomplishment by good men can inspire, for Machiavelli, inspire other good people to imitate the examples of the good man. In fact, Machiavelli writes, especially when he discusses this extremely important concept, that if you want to retrieve, if you want to redeem your republic from corruption, what you should do is to recover the good founding principles. This is a concept that here in the political history of the United States is tremendously important. Republics, they can retrieve and rediscover themselves if they are capable of finding and putting in practice the good founding principles that have been corrupt. And who should do that for Machiavelli? Well, the drawing back of republics toward their beginnings arises also from the simple virtue of one man, without depending on any law that stimulates you to any execution. Nonetheless, these men are of such reputation and so much example that good men desire to imitate them, and the wicked are ashamed to hold to a life contrary to them. So the goodness has this power of inviting imitation. And Machiavelli then, of course, has something to say, not only on the meaning of the effects of goodness, but what it requires, what incites, what encourages, what promotes goodness. There are many factors that promote goodness. One, certainly, Machiavelli writes, are the laws. Therefore it is said, he writes in Discourses 1:3, hunger and poverty make men industrious. The laws make them good. And when there is the good customs, then you don't even need good laws. Even more revealing is Machiavelli's assessment that the goodness of one individual, together with virtue, keeps a republic free. What does he mean by virtue? As you know, the term virtù in Machiavelli has different meanings. One certainly is energy, determination, force, strength. In other instances, it is the equivalent of moral virtue. So we have to always consider the context in which Machiavelli is using the term. But in this context, virtue is the friend of goodness, because Machiavelli writes, then republics resurrect, resurrect, and restore the free way of life when citizens esteem and admire the good citizens, not the corrupt citizens. So only if citizens, they learn again to admire and follow the good citizens, republics can have a moral and political rebirth. Like I said, this extraordinary political achievement is the work, Machiavelli said it again and again, but especially check Discourses 3:1, is the work of a good man. Only good men can produce the rebirth of the republics. This would be the right moment to do something of which that I have found extremely interesting. This to say, what is the opposite of goodness for Machiavelli? I think we have to ask this question. What is the opposite of goodness for Niccolo? Well, Machiavelli has a large vocabulary to describe the opposite of goodness. Let me see if I find it. I think I have even tried an exercise in translation. Here it is. Machiavelli has a nice vocabulary. If you are not good, you can be cattivo, triste, maligno, scellerato, empio. Translation. evil, wicked, impious. Well, my friends, we Italians, we have a richer vocabulary when to describe the forms of cattiveria, wickedness. I don't know why. You know, we have such a variety. Must be a reason. You can guess. To properly render these terms in English would require a long discussion, but so far the possible translation is this: evil, wicked, impious. What worried Machiavelli was that the wicked men almost always win and crush and defeat the good ones. He worried about this fact concerning the human condition in general, but also with particular regard to political life. Now, I think we should ask this question. If Machiavelli did not worry, he would not have written so many pages to empower the good ones. The wicked man in politics did not need then and did not need now Machiavelli's advice. They were doing then and they are doing now extremely well. This is exactly what worried Machiavelli. He did not resign to this fact. He did not consider this fact unchangeable. So as I move to the conclusion of my presentation, I want to stress yet again that Machiavelli focuses on the powerlessness of goodness when it comes to fight against malignant man, the evil man, the wicked man. Just consider what he writes on Discourses 3:30. He reflects on this example of Pier Soderini. Who was Pier Soderini? He was, if you want, the president of the Republic of Florence, under which Machiavelli served. What did Soderini do? Soderini believed that with time, with goodness, with his fortune, he could eliminate envy. What he means is this. Soderini was ousted from power by a fraction of the Florentine oligarchy. And he was counseled by some, including Machiavelli, you have to fight them, to punish them harshly, because they are seditious. But Soderini was buono. He wanted to keep his goodness. He did not know, just read the citation, that one cannot wait for time. Goodness is not enough. That's the problem with goodness. It's not enough. When you are fighting those who are really wicked, those who are really evil. But there is another example that goodness is not sufficient. And I will say at the end of this lecture, sufficient to do what? Is the case of a political leader who can hardly be considered wicked, Moses. Moses is the redeemer of the Hebrews, is the friend of God. And he is the only one who was able to allow to talk to God, Moses. Well, Machiavelli writes that Moses, whoever reads the Bible judiciously, will see that since he wished his laws and his orders to go forward, is to say the redemption of the Jews, Moses was forced to kill infinite men who, moved by nothing other than envy, were opposed to his plans. Just read Exodus 32, and you know the story, the golden calf. For Machiavelli, Moses was an exemplary good man. He accomplished the redemption of his people from slavery. This is the most outstanding of all political achievements, because of his goodness and his courage, Moses deserved to become God's friend, like I said. Now Machiavelli was daring enough to try to teach the good citizens and good princes how to win against wicked ones without becoming themselves cattivi, tristi, maligni, scelerati, or empi. That's the position of Niccolo. Whereas it is easy for a wicked man to use wicked means to dominate the republic, it is almost impossible for a good man to use wicked means to save and redeem the republic. That's the problem that Machiavelli has. If you need to use wicked means, can a good person do it? Or would this person be incapable of doing it? The problem is very nicely summarized in Discourses on Livy, Book 1, Chapter 18, where Machiavelli writes, because the reordering of a city for political life, he means republican life, presupposes a good man becoming a prince of a republic by violence presupposes a bad man. So one will find that very rarely happens that someone good wishes to become prince by bad ways, even though his end be good. Well, founders of kingdoms or republics who are capable of resorting to wickedness, if necessary, deserve, therefore, to be excused, not justified. The idea that the end justifies the means justify the end. Yeah, the end justifies the mean. The end never occurred in Machiavelli's writings. This is simply a poor interpretation. Here Machiavelli proclaims in the Discourses the principle that good citizens must serve and uphold the safety and the republic of their fatherland if they are truly good. Can you possibly be good if you are a prince or a governor and you have to make the choice that would save the liberty of your country? You don't do that. If you don't do that, are you still good? And that's why Machiavelli writes that when the safety of the fatherland is at stake, you have to be able to enter evil. Now I know what you are all thinking. Professor Viroli, you want to persuade us about the goodness of Machiavelli, but you have not yet mentioned the prince. That's what you want, I know. No, well, in fact, I reply that it is precisely in the lines from Il Principe that have been endlessly cited to claim that Machiavelli encouraged or justified the prince's evil deeds. It's there that Machiavelli expounds his ideas on how to empower goodness. To begin with, in those lines that I'm going to cite them in a moment, but you know them by heart. I know that you have just studied the Prince. In those lines, Machiavelli never uses the rich vocabulary that he had available to denote evil actions, cattiveria, tristizia, malignità, scelleratezza, impietà. Or you are going to say, Professor Viroli, Machiavelli was astute. He did not want to use strong words like wicked, evil, tristizia, malignità. No, Machiavelli has written much worse. If you want, I can give you example. What is worse in 1515 to write in Italy, where there is someone called the Pope, that because of gli esempi della Chiesa, because of the examples of the Church, noi italiani siamo diventati senza religione cattivi. We Italians are without religion and cattivi, evil, because of the Pope. That's quite a strong statement. In fact, the first edition of the Discourses on Livy that appeared in 1531 is a counsel from an old, almost senile professor to young scholars. when you study the texts, try to study also the first edition of those texts. Or even better, read the manuscripts. What the author wrote before the manuscript became a book, and read the first edition. Now, the first edition of the Discourses on Livy, all these sections with these nice words about the Church of Rome, guess what? They don't appear. They disappeared. It was the censorship, of course. Well, but now Machiavelli does not use the words that denote the opposite of goodness. But what does he say? Well, let me be as concise, as rapid as possible. You know what Machiavelli writes, Prince 15, I don't know if I have it. Prince 15. Okay, this is already 17. Okay, that's it. Machiavelli writes, I summarize, it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good. Extremely complicated sentence, not to be good. And then he uses another metaphor in 17th, I guess, or 18th. This is to say, the prince should not depart from good when possible, but know how to enter in evil when forced by necessity. And then again in chapter 19, a prince who wants to maintain his state is often forced not to be good. Now let's focus on the words. To be able not to be good, to be forced not to be good, to enter into evil are not the same as being cattivo, tristo, maligno, scellerato, empio. To be evil or to be wicked means to do evil on purpose. To be determined to oppress, to hurt, to be exceedingly cruel, to have a hostile and inimical disposition, especially against good citizens and against republican liberty, to act against God and justice. The expressions that Machiavelli chooses in the prince have quite different meanings. Not to be good means that the person who is good must for a while, when necessary, put his goodness on hold and then resume it as soon as possible. The necessity might arise often. Machiavelli uses the adverb spesso. But princes and republican rulers must stay in evil and must not be good for only as long as it is necessary, not a moment longer, and certainly not forever. Consider the metaphor. Entering into evil, entrare nel male. Well, it indicates that one enters into evil from another place. If you are entering evil, where ought a prince or a citizen enter into evil from, if not from goodness? It is one thing to enter into evil, quite another to be evil. Let me summarize. To be able not to be good, these are the words of Machiavelli. To be forced not to be good, to enter into evil, are the qualities that princes and republican leaders must have if they want to really accomplish the goals that good persons must try to accomplish. The right interpretation of Machiavelli is that we must at last acknowledge that Machiavelli was the wisest possible teacher of goodness, because he taught what it takes to accomplish the good, which is different from imagining the good. This is, I think, a teacher of goodness, the only, I'm done, appropriate qualification for a political theorist like Machiavelli, who has offered the right counsels that permit political leaders to really attain the good. Which good? To found and protect just political orders, redeem peoples from foreign domination, from tyranny, and from corruption. That's the good. But true teachers, and many of you are teachers here, they know that one thing is to explain what must be done. Another is to motivate someone to do what you think this person should do. Which rewards does Machiavelli promise to his princes and founders and redeemers? Well, Machiavelli promises them the greatest possible reward. What was the greatest possible reward? Gloria, glory, of course. As Cicero, but what did glory mean in Machiavelli's time? Here I'm going to give you the obvious recommendation. When you focus on a term, like in this case, gloria, be sure to understand what they meant and not to attribute to the authors you're studying what we mean by glory. Now, in the case of Machiavelli, we know what they meant by glory because they were following Cicero. And Cicero, he explained, let me summarize, that glory is the good fame, notice, of good citizens, not simply fame. Glory, repeat, is the reward for the good citizens. Not, in this sense, is different from fame. Machiavelli diligently follows Cicero. Glory is the right reward for virtue. In The Art of War, Book 7, page 117 in my selection, he stressed that the Romans recognized glory, attributed glory only to the soldiers and the captains who had fought for the liberty of the Republic. But there is more. Machiavelli writes that from virtue comes glory. And he also notices, and this is a clarification of the highest importance if we want to understand Niccolo. That is to say, true glory only, and I stress, only belongs to those political and military leaders who are valiant and good. In fact, he writes, I say that Pompey and Caesar and almost all the captains who were in Rome after the last Carthaginian War, they acquired fame as able, not as good men. Those who have lived before them acquire glory because they were able and good. That is what it takes to attain glory. You have to be able and good. The conclusion, it seems to me, can only be that only good men long for true glory. But because these good men, writes Machiavelli, who do not use war as they are, do not want to draw from anything but toil and danger and glory. So those who are not mercenary soldiers, they are good men because they want glory. Glory belongs to questi uomini buoni. So if they want to attain the greatest possible reward that he means the human being, us, can hope to attain in this world, if we want to attain the glory that makes immortal, for Machiavelli, you must be a good person and pursue goodness with all your energies, even at the cost of entering into evil. I think that this is Machiavelli's moral and political teaching. This is, in my opinion, the lesson of a good teacher of goodness. Thank you very much.